Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review for you all, so hopefully you find this one interesting. This movie is a horror film from Iceland, Icelandic language English subs, released in the year 2023, directed by Stephenson, and this film is called Delirium. So Delirium is about a man who lives in Reykjavik. He has a beautiful wife, a young daughter, a beautiful home, and he also rents out an apartment to people that are new to the city, that are travellers. And so he appears to have it all, but unfortunately there is something that happened in his past that is really haunting his present. So he has a court case that's looming that puts him under a lot of stress, but unfortunately his stress is about to be magnified when one of the tenants in his apartment that he rents out kills himself. Now when he goes to clean up, he comes across one of the tenant's possessions and he takes it home with him, but unfortunately this is the start of a downward spiral of obsession, psychological angst, and also a hint of the occult. So what happens at that point on is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Delirium. I had no idea what to expect with this movie. When it comes to Icelandic cinema, it is definitely very impressive, but when it comes to lesser known films, this is where my skepticism starts to mount. So coming into Delirium, no one ever talks about it. It was on a streaming service here in Australia, and I thought, well, I have to give this movie an opportunity to impress me, but I didn't really have high hopes that it would. And after watching Delirium, I will say that although there were some aspects of this movie that were impressive, unfortunately it was a little bit of a letdown. And that's something I'll go into a little bit later, but what I liked about the film is that it is low budget, and for the majority of the film it looks fairly decent. So as far as cinematography, it has a very gloomy, ominous feel to it. You know that something is wrong, and it does have questions that need answering that actually keep you glued to the screen. So although there are some issues with the filmmaking, at least the story was enough to captivate me to a point where I wanted to watch it to the end. And so that's something that I have to give the director credit for. You also have some fairly good acting performances. It's clear that these people can actually act, and so when it comes to low budget sort of filmmaking, the curse of low budget is that it has low quality acting, but I thought as though the acting did a fairly decent job, and there were some moments that I thought were actually quite unique in the way it tells its story, which can come as a negative, but I thought as though at least it was trying something. And so there were some shots that I thought were quite impressive, and there were some horror set pieces that I thought were fairly decent, but unfortunately that's where the positives stop, and this is where the negatives begin. The movie just isn't that scary. So it does have a plot, and you feel as though you've seen this sort of thing before, and so it is very generic, and it is actually quite predictable. So you have a low budget, and the problem with this low budget movie is that it doesn't know its capacity, it doesn't know its limitations. So when it goes outside of those limitations, this is where you can tell that it's a low budget movie. So with really good low budget movies, they know their limits, they know their capacity, therefore you can't really tell that it's low budget. But this movie tries to be a little bit too extravagant for its own good, and the low quality of that particular element of this movie does become a distraction. And so I just kept feeling as though it was disorientating in all the wrong ways. So the movie has cutaways from scene to scene. I'm not going to give anything away, but this character is experiencing some very strange occurrences, but when the movie is executing those occurrences, I just felt as though it was cheap. It was just cut away to another scene out of nowhere, and I just thought to myself, alright, I'm watching a low budget movie. You also have some horror set pieces that I thought looked really bad. Unfortunately, as far as the occult in this movie, you've seen it all before, but just the way that it's done, I just thought to myself, it could have just held it in to a degree. As I said, it doesn't know its limitations, and it goes outside of its bubble, outside of its capacity, and this is where you really notice the shortcomings. So the overall movie, as I said, there are questions that beg answering, and it does keep your interest somewhat from start to finish, but it just doesn't really have another gear. It just goes along at a very flat pace, and at the end of the film, I just thought, alright, well that was a decent way to finish it, but unfortunately, it's just an incredibly forgettable experience, and that's the biggest problem with this movie. It is very forgettable, very generic, and it just doesn't really provide anything different, and it doesn't live up to the standard of Icelandic cinema and Norse cinema in general. And so the movie just doesn't realise the limitations that it has. There is no real self-awareness, that comes across as a fairly dull and boring horror film that just doesn't really scare, and it just doesn't really produce anything that made me excited and want to go out there and recommend it. So overall for Delirium, I'm only going to give this one 2 stars. It's a decent attempt, but unfortunately not one of the better ones. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies. I'll see you later. Bye.